work for Stanley, he's not going to stop until it's exactly the way he wants it, right, wrong, or indifferent.
How many films did Stanley make in his lifetime? Very few. He took a long, long time between the films. He was obsessed with those films.
Stanley always admired Woody Allen for turning out every year a new film. I mean, it's wonderful. He would have loved to do it, but he couldn't. It wasn't his style.
He was a man of such varied interests that he was always busy and went through sequential obsessions. I would talk to him sometimes every day, you know, and there were endless, endless interests.
What he really wanted to make was a film about Napoleon, because Napoleon was someone he revered.
Napoleon was one of the abiding interests of Stanley's life, along with extraterrestrial intelligence, the Holocaust, concentration camps, Julius Caesar, English place name etymology, and 3,000 other things. Stanley had a tough time keeping up with his interests. You know, it was a full-time job being Stanley.
He is considered by many the greatest film director the medium has ever known. Yet in a 45-year career, Stanley Kubrick's films number only a dozen. That he strove for perfection is well established. What is less known is that he lavished years of energy on several films that never saw the flickering light of the silver screen. The most famous of these, AI, Artificial Intelligence, was made by Steven Spielberg with Kubrick's blessing. But there were two other films that came tantalizingly close to creation.
After the success of 2001: A Space Odyssey, a success which means that Kubrick had an opportunity to do what he wanted, and what he wanted to do was Napoleon. Now, Kubrick was fascinated by Napoleon. He was this man who changed the political landscape of the modern world.
Stanley was always interested in things military, and I think he was very interested in those campaigns and so forth.
It's really interesting when he was talking about making his film of Napoleon, he describes these battle scenes as ballets, as violent ballets. And he has this image in his mind of choreographing violence even then.
Kubrick was fascinated by this man, by what he did politically and culturally, but also personally. Kubrick wasn't just interested in the big fight sequences, the big wars. He was interested in what Napoleon did the night before. And usually it was paperwork, because you don't run an empire by telling people what to do. You've got to do the paperwork. And I'm sure that aspect of Napoleon appealed to Kubrick, who did quite a lot of paperwork himself.
He compiled a screenplay, which is very interesting because it is not entirely about Napoleon as a military genius. A lot of it is about Napoleon's early days when he was in Paris and he was the protege of various other rich and influential people. And there's an enormous amount of sex in it, which is surprising. And the descriptions are all of these women with décolleté gowns and people having it off in closets and so on. And the battles, of course, take place, but it's not like a film like Waterloo.
Bold, brilliant, and exacting, obsessed with detail. The phrases have been used to describe both Napoleon and the director who yearned to tell his story.
Well, it's an easy parallel to make. I don't know if it tells us much about Stanley or Napoleon.
Napoleon also had a technique among his staff, which was that he would rotate them in and out of his regard. So one week he'd have one favourite and he'd defer to this person and give them all the good jobs. And then the next week this person would notice they were pushed a little to one side and someone else was being brought in. And he would rotate these people all the time so that everybody was on tenterhooks and everybody was desperate to do what he asked. In fact, the thing you heard over and over again in the Kubrick unit is, "But what shall I tell Stanley?"
Napoleon would have been a very, very typical Kubrick film. His downfall was self-inflicted. Now, he was a man who was enormously gifted for his job, colossally successful. From a small officer who came from a foreign country, namely from Corsica, and was trained in the south of France, he crowned himself Emperor of France in 1804. Now, this is just quite astonishing. And this man, however, in the end, was governed by his emotions more than by his intellect. And this is an old story of Stanley. This is this conflict between emotion and intellect.
As with any Kubrick project, the first step was to accumulate exhaustive and meticulous research.
He had teams going around all over the place, gathering up huge quantities of visual material, documentary material. He sent off Andrew Burke and his assistant to Paris to find actual artifacts of Napoleon. Andrew arrived with notable ill-timing in May 1968, at the height of the student revolution. So they're walking around in the streets with, cars on fire and police shooting at students and so on, looking for Napoleon's portable lavatory. So obsessive was Kubrick that Andrew brought back a sample of the earth of Waterloo so that wherever they recreated the battle, they could do it with exactly the same colour earth.
He bought thousands of books in every language about Napoleon, everything he could find. Now, there's research and there's research. Now, Kubrick got it to a point where he had a filing cabinet full of cards, and on these cards were every day of Napoleon's life. He could pick a card and he would be able to tell you where Napoleon was, what he was doing, why he was doing it. That's the level of research, detailed research that he did on Napoleon.
One of Kubrick's challenges in developing the project was realizing the enormity of his vision within the confines of a realistic budget.
Well, he had designed it so that it was reasonably inexpensive, considering the fact that it was Napoleon and had vast battle scenes.
And so what Kubrick did, he came with this great idea of having paper costumes. So you would have like 4,000 people in proper costumes, the people you would be able to see. But in the background, you would have 10, 20, 100,000 people in paper costumes. And so it would just be a disposable costume. And he did camera tests on these to see how they would register. And they looked just the same as a normal costume close up.
One of the problems with doing Napoleon the way Stanley wanted to would be access to these great rooms at Versailles and things like this, which nobody's going to let you shoot in. And so he realized that with the front projection, the technology we had used for 2001 for the ape sequence, he could use that same technology and be able to tell the story of Napoleon like it had never been told before. Because you could be there at the Battle of Austerlitz, you could be there in the Hall of Mirrors of Versailles. So he was very excited about that.
In the late 1960s, Kubrick saw an actor he immediately realized would be perfect to play his Napoleon.
He called me like he does many people out of nowhere. I didn't believe it was him on the phone. And as he is to almost all other people, very flattering and very nice about your work, and, still being Stanley, he wanted to make sure I could speak other than as a Southerner. He had seen Easy Rider, so he had me read something from a play and put it on tape, make sure I spoke regular English,
But the problem was that this went on too long, and some other people had the idea of doing films about Napoleon.
The film was pulled by MGM because the Rod Steiger movie, Waterloo, not a bad film at all, was not really as successful as the studios had hoped, and MGM then didn't want to proceed, and the film wasn't green-lighted. We had an enormous amount of pre-production cost already in it, but not the rest. And so Stanley was very, very disappointed. He was really quite depressed for a few days, but, life has to go on.
Then the question, of course, arose, well, why didn't Stanley just do it? It's public domain, for Christ's sakes. It's Napoleon, so MGM can't own Napoleon. But he could never do it again, because if he tried to do it at Warner's, for example, MGM would come after Warner's and Stanley and say, hey, wait a minute, you're infringing upon our story. And we'd say, no, this is another screenplay that Stanley wrote. And they'd say, yeah, but Napoleon's Napoleon. You can't get the guy to do it twice. And there would be no way, because his concept was so brilliant and so much a part of his enthusiasm for doing it, that he could not do another version that would be satisfactory to him. So it just languished there.
The thing that does strike you is how much Barry Lyndon was to become, in a way, a summation of everything he was thinking in those days. This very hieratic form, this very slow, even, adult way of making films, this long looks at things, slow movements. You know, all that stuff that you can see in scraps in some of these other movies, it all comes together in Barry Lyndon.
Though he would return to Napoleon on occasion in the coming years, Kubrick never got the film as close to production as he did in the heady days following the release of 2001. In the meantime, he continued to develop a number of other projects, including what he hoped would be the definitive film about World War II and the Holocaust.
Stanley would have loved to make a film about this topic. You know, it was an important topic, the Holocaust and the whole Nazi period.
I'm not sure that even Stanley could tell you why he wanted to make a film about the Holocaust. I mean, beyond it's interesting, it's dramatic, it's shocking, it's awful. It had always fascinated him. I mean, what happened in Germany in the 30s and 40s. And this is a kind of theme that's sort of also echoed in Clockwork Orange, that culture and civilization doesn't preclude savage, irrational behavior.
And he felt that he could make a very important film about the Nazis, the whole issue of that nightmare.
So he looked around for an existing book, and he read a book by an American-based but Polish-born writer named Louis Begley called Wartime Lies.
I gathered from what Jan Harlan told me was that Kubrick had always wanted to make a movie about the war in Europe. And he decided that Wartime Lies was the book that he wanted to use. I have always admired Kubrick as a filmmaker, just boundlessly. So when I was told that it was he who was acquiring the rights, I practically jumped up for joy.
Kubrick determined to call his film The Aryan Papers, a reference to the documents sought by Jews in occupied countries to avoid internment.
The theory on which Hitler and the Nazis proceeded was that there was the Aryan race, of which they were the splendid examples, and non-Aryans, such as Jews, were a vermin-like species that, as was finally decided at Wannsee, should be exterminated. So if you got papers to establish you as a non-Jew, the point was really to establish you as an Aryan.
Aryan Papers is about a Jewish boy and his aunt trying to survive in Nazi-occupied Poland during World War II. It's a film about survival. Kubrick liked to do films about people in extreme situations, people making life and death decisions.
For the key role of the young boy in his story, Kubrick chose Joseph Mazzello, fresh off his co-starring role in Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park.
I think that the first time I remember Aryan Papers being talked about was on the set of Jurassic Park. What happened was Stanley Kubrick saw Radio Flyer, which was a movie I did when I was 7, my first real big movie. And from that, he was really interested in me.
For the role of the aunt, Uma Thurman was an early favorite. Ultimately, however, Kubrick set his sights on Dutch actress Johanna ter Steger.
He just rang me up one day and said, I'm starting preparation for this film. Could you come out and do some tests for 3 or 4 days? So I said, yes, of course, you know, what's it about? And he said, I'll tell you when you get here. And I said, well, who's in it? And he said, a young actress. I said, what's her name? He said, I'm not going to tell you. I said, okay. And I went out there and we did all these tests. He wouldn't tell me the name of this girl. He just wouldn't tell me.
I finished up Jurassic Park, and Stanley Kubrick wanted to meet me. I was flown out to meet him. I was flown out for my mom to read the script. She had read the script, and Stanley came in, and I remember most of the meeting consisted of him staring at me. He even commented at one point, he said, I'm sorry, Joe, don't feel uncomfortable, but I'm just looking at you. I'm just looking at your eyes, I have to look at your eyes. It was really important to him, I remember, to get a 3-year-old that looked like me. And so he was looking at me to make sure he got the right person to play me as a younger kid.
Meanwhile, Kubrick and his team were immersed in their research.
I did a lot of work on that for about, I don't know, 18 months, 2 years. I did most of the initial research when Stanley had read the story, you know, tracking down books, going to photo libraries, this, that, and the other.
Producer Jan Harlan made frequent calls to novelist Louis Begley, compiling the rich tapestry of detail that fed Kubrick's creativity.
Kubrick rang up and said, there's a song mentioned in chapter 6 or something. What is the song? And Begley, who's a very, very formal lawyer, had to sing the song down the telephone lines so it could be transcribed by Kubrick.
Teams were dispatched throughout Europe to scout locations.
We went mainly into Czechoslovakia, found some wonderful locations. A fantastic town on the border with Poland that was still bombed. It was perfect for a bomb town. And then we went over to Aarhus, and it was perfect. We found wonderful apartments. We found this old army barracks that had it had a stage with a dirt floor, so we could have built forests and things in there. It had offices, parade ground you could use as a lot and build streets, whatever, you know. Everything. We found everything.
He began researching in Denmark, went to the Danish Film Institute, acquired enormous quantity of films of the period, documentaries and dramas, started looking for people to play in the material, brought in huge quantities of papers. The mayor of Aarhus, I think, wrote him a letter of warm appreciation at the expectation of a lot of work coming to the country, little realizing that Kubrick would never have shot there at all. He would have recreated it.
We were as far as getting permission from the city of Brno to have the trams from the tram museum on the street for a weekend, to close the center city for a weekend and have Nazi flags hanging down the buildings and all this.
As pre-production dragged on, Kubrick was in danger of losing his young star.
The film kept getting pushed back, and I did another movie called The River Wild, where they wanted to darken my hair. And this is how close we were to really doing it, is that they wanted to darken my hair, and somehow his agent got wind of it and told him, and he called the production and said, you cannot touch Joe's hair. And so for a while after I was signed to do it, there were negotiations between the movies that I was doing and him.
As with Napoleon, circumstances beyond his control forced Kubrick to abandon the Aryan papers and move on to other projects.
Schindler's List came out. We had a similar topic, and Warner Brothers, Terry Semel and Stanley decided not to come, a few months or a year after Schindler's List with a similar film. We had been burned already on Full Metal Jacket because Platoon was ahead of us. And it was an excellent film, Platoon. So, normal moviegoers, they don't want to necessarily see 2 Vietnam or 2 Holocaust films in one season or whatever. So that was the reason why it was postponed.
In fact, we got to the point where Stanley had to say yes or no to shoot the film. Suddenly, Anya, his middle daughter, got pregnant, and I said to Phil Hobbs, who I was with, that's the end of this film. Because Stanley would go nowhere without Christiana. Christiana would stay with Anya. So I said, we ain't going to do this film, Phil. We know we're not.
But what put it over the edge, ironically, is that Jurassic Park came out. With Jurassic Park, Stanley Kubrick saw how technology had advanced, and he said, well, I think I'm going to do AI instead.
Ultimately, Kubrick turned AI over to Steven Spielberg, focusing his own energies on Eyes Wide Shut. It was during the final stages of post-production on that film that Stanley Kubrick died on March the 7th, 1999. In his passing, cinema lost one of its greatest artists, and with him, the films he might have made.